Brittany Jaroudi, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Owners podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're excited to be completely hungry by the end of this one. But before we get into food and all of that, we'd love to know if you have a moment of gratitude to share with us and the listeners.
So my moment of gratitude comes from recently being pregnant and really reflecting on how much healthier and, this whole journey has been. Getting pregnant has been, and I attest it to my lifestyle. Thinking about, in my 20s doing this, I don't think I would have had the same ease and outcomes and, potentially for the baby to be as healthy as it is right now. So really a lot of gratitude for finding this before starting to plan to have children is my big gratitude I've been really reflecting on for a while now.
I think that's great. And I always love when people say that they're doing things better in one decade than they would have done a decade before, or even decades before. We saw that with Adam's athletics and all of that. So it's a gift that you found it.
Yes. And it's a gift that I'm excited to raise our child this way and to introduce them even earlier than I found it. So really excited to just keep on giving this lifestyle the gift of it.
How long have you been on this plant-based journey?
About 7, almost 8 years now.
And how did you get into it?
So it started when I just got married. I was only around 23 and I was already having a lot of health issues at 23. I was considered morbidly obese on the BMI scale. I'm very short. I'm only 4'11" in height. And so it was really obvious that I, had a lot of extra weight. But besides the weight, I just started having issues with my blood pressure. When I would go to the doctors, it was insanely high. And to the point where they put me on 2 different blood pressure medicines. And also my cholesterol came back very high. And so they were starting to talk about statins. And I also had this other test taken through my husband's work insurance. They were going to give us a discount if we had a blood panel taken. And, being newlyweds with no money, you definitely do that. And it came back with my C-reactive protein, came back at a 16. And it was underlined. And I never had heard of that test before. It was an HS C-reactive protein. And so I went to Google and started down the rabbit hole of that. But it very much got my attention with all of the other things, and also having such a bad family history of both cancer and heart disease. So really being a newlywed, I was not doing too hot. And, I say that it was the biggest blessing that I just kind of stumbled upon Forks Over Knives. It was on Netflix. At the time, I was off from work for Easter break. And so it was the night before Easter, and my husband and I watched it. And it was like they were speaking to me through that documentary, because you have Dr. Elston talk about heart disease and Dr. Campbell talk about cancer. And they also had the producer go through and get the same test I was getting done. And all of his bad numbers were significantly better than mine. And I was much younger. And so I was a little just, upset that my numbers were so bad, but also hopeful, because at the end of it, he adopted this lifestyle and got all of his numbers in check. And I just thought, well, if he can do it, so can I. And so I haven't looked back ever since.
I think that's amazing. We hear so many people talk about Forks Over Knives. Adam found plant-based even before it came out, but by the time I was ready to go, I had watched it too. And it does speak to everybody in their own way. Before I ask a few more questions, for those people who are driving, running, walking, or biking and can't look up C-reactive protein, can you just bring us through some of those scary things that you found when you looked it up? What are the indications for that?
Yeah, it's a marker of inflammation, and the HS C-reactive protein is specifically cardiac related. And so, it's a pretty good indicator of you possibly having a cardiac event in the future. And so mine was 16, and under 3 is normal. So lots of inflammation going on. And, other things can cause your C-reactive protein to be high, like a dental infection and things like that. But I didn't have anything else going on. I didn't have any autoimmune things that hadn't showed up yet, I say, because I probably was down the road of having, other issues happening. But as I adopted this lifestyle, I kept getting that test taken. And it didn't come down into normal like overnight. It was, every 3 months I had it checked, and it came down. It went from a 16 to an 8, and then it went to a 6, and then it went to, I think it went to a 5, and then a 4, and a 4, 3.9, and eventually came down all the way to a 0.5, which is where it sits today. But I just, I was real patient with myself. I think a lot of the times we instantly want numbers just to be amazing. I've only been doing this a month and we want our numbers to be amazing. But at the same time, I also looked at it that I had been damaging my body for over 20 years, eating this way and this lifestyle. And so I was very gentle with myself of, it's improving. And each time I did it, it got better and better. And the longer I stuck with it, the lower it went down into normal.
How long did it take for those numbers to drop? Just so people get an idea of the time frame from 16 to 0.5.
Yeah, I noticed, it also correlated with my weight. So it took me about a year to get 70 pounds off, although weight wasn't my focus. My focus was, doing all the research and trying to get my cholesterol down, my high blood pressure down, and that C-reactive protein down. It all kind of came down together. But I would say the C-reactive protein probably took about a year and a half to get it down to normal. I just checked it every 3 to 4 months. And I actually paid for the blood test on my own. You can actually go online here in the United States and go to, I think it's called walk-in labs, and purchase it. And it was like under $40 just to get that one test done. And I just took it to Quest or LabCorp here and had my blood drawn. So it was really neat to have all that data really to like notice and see. But my blood pressure came down much quicker, and my cholesterol did. But, as I lost, over 70 pounds, it all shifted into normal. And the biggest thing for me was how immediately better I felt. I was having some issues with even chest pain being younger, even 23. And that went away pretty immediately, which everything was a good indicator that things were going in the right direction.
Well, congratulations on getting that done. It's obviously not an easy thing to do. And for someone to drop that much weight in such a short period of time, a year is still a short period of time. It means you're working hard at it, and it takes a lot. And it also takes a lot of support around you to be able to do that. So is the husband on board with your lifestyle, or is that, you each do your own thing, but he was still supportive?
Yeah, after about, I would say 6 months, he jumped on board because he was seeing, the amazing transformation in front of his eyes. We had been together since I have been 16, 15 years old. So he's seen kind of all the stages, which is really lovely to have. But also I did all of the cooking. So I just kind of obviously made whole food plant-based recipes for us. And then, he would occasionally have a cheese pizza when he was out. And that was kind of his last, thing to let go of in about 6 months. But it was really easy for him because he grew up from a Middle Eastern background. So, meat wasn't his focus. He was used to lentils and things I was not used to, and used to dates and things like that we have in this lifestyle. But yeah, I'm very lucky that he has been on board and has been doing it with me ever since.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference when you have that support.
It does.
Sure.
So you were doing the cooking. Did you do no salt, no sugar, no oil right out of the gate, or was that a progression?
Yeah, the no oil, I feel like a lot of people in the plant-based movement agree on the no oil. So that was pretty immediate just because I was, kind of following what Dr. Esselstyn. I was really worried about that C-reactive protein and all the heart disease things. So the no oil was right at the get-go. The salt also was the salt and sugar also went pretty quickly too, because I was worried about blood pressure. So I was, tampering down on my salt usage, and obviously not eating processed foods. You cut down on that pretty easily, but, went from having a salt shaker to not having it anymore. And same with the sugar. It was really easy for me to look at trying to get as whole as possible. So I just made the switch to have, applesauce as a sweetener, or dates as a sweetener, or dried fruit. So I would say probably quicker than most, I went SOS free, but yeah, I wanted to have the maximum results possible. And I was very motivated to get all of my health in check. So, I always say that, sometimes I'm kind of a unicorn situation where I just overnight changed 100%, but I was really at a desperate time. I was witnessing my parents go through a lot of health struggles, and really aunts and uncles very young, similar, that it was a very motivation of, I don't want to do that. So
yeah, you were motivated. You had a lot on the table. You had a lot riding on it. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's amazing. And part of it was that you were able to recreate some of your family favorites or some of your own favorites to be no sugar, no oil, no salts, and still enjoy them. So talk to us a little bit about how the whole, cooking process came up for you, and making the videos and all of that.
Yeah, so after I had been doing this for a little bit, I wanted to make foods that my husband was going to enjoy. So I just picked things that we always had, like lasagna and meatloaf and things that were very familiar, and we just swapped them for whole food plant-based ingredients. And I just wanted to share. I kind of made a pact with the big guy upstairs that if he helped me get my health back, I would do anything to help someone else get that gift back. And so really that was the inspiration for starting making recipes in YouTube. I actually had the camera for about a whole year and then didn't do anything. And finally had this impulse to share that, no, I really do need to get on and start sharing this message, that because, in this movement, most people find this when they're older, and anytime you find it is wonderful. But really, if you can find it before you have something major happen, the better, and what a gift to have that early. So I really wanted to reach out and try to reach, as many people as possible, but really to, my peers that, we don't think about our health until after something happens or down the road. And, it really can be important and taste good and be enjoyable. So I started making recipes, and for the salt, oil, and sugar, just replace them with things that were pretty easy. Most of us, I'm sure your listeners will know about using vegetable broth and water to saute, and that was a pretty easy swap. And in baked goods, you can use like applesauce instead of oil and things like that. And for the salt, I really did a lot of research on Dr. Greger and all of his videos and science, and how he talks about white miso that's soy based and how the soy is protective over the sodium. So I started to experiment using a little bit of white miso in recipes to still give it that flavor, but without the negative effects. And I noticed that it didn't affect my blood pressure. My blood pressure was not rising using a little bit in things. So I started making recipes with that. So some people, shifting to an SOS-free lifestyle can start with that. And then, eventually you might not need it. And with sugar, I really loved using dried fruit. We use dates and things, and people don't realize that instead of date paste, you can use any dried fruit to make a sweet paste. So you can use apricots or raisins or figs and get a totally different flavor profile, savory or sweet, whatever you need to add that for. So it just was really fun. It was like being a big experiment. I have a background in art, so I just really put it into my food and being as creative as possible and having fun with it. So it's really been such a joy to share.
I think that's a common misconception, that it's, people, A, it costs so much money to eat this way. B, you only eat salad. And it's totally not true. People eat all kinds of foods, and you could make so many different options available that it's a beautiful way to eat. You just have to know where to look and what the resource is. So having another resource like yours is always great because people need them.
Yeah, I love sharing, and there's a lot more people sharing now than even when I started. So I always tell people to find somebody you really love and try their recipes, and that my goal also was that it wasn't going to be just a quick fix. I wasn't going to do this lifestyle and then head back. It was a lifelong commitment and decision. And I saw no reason to ever go back to the way I used to go. And so I always wanted it to be enjoyable and not, opening up, that it's not limiting, you're not taking away things, you're really adding an abundance. And I also got really very into trying new foods that I never had, like even new vegetables and fruits and grains that I had never tried before. So it just became very fun on top of learning how good it is for our health.
Once you start to get comfortable with one thing, you could bring in something else that's new. You don't have to go all new at once, right? For people listening who are still at the beginning, like that's like, oh, what's, at the beginning we were back in the time of what was quinoa, right? Like people didn't even really know what quinoa was yet. So what's quinoa, what's bulgur, bulgur. I don't know. Like all these different things. What is miso? Like we didn't, besides miso soup at the Japanese restaurant, we didn't know that like miso was a paste that you could use. So all of that. Let's go back to miso for a minute, because I think a lot of people are familiar with using dried fruits for the sweeteners and but
wait, like just cut up dried fruit and throw it into something, or you're actually blending it into like a paste?
Yeah, I like to do a paste. So I take hot water and you kind of reconstitute the dried fruit. And so you can let it sit, just like if you had kind of older dates, if you don't have like a great Vitamix blender, you can let them kind of plump up, and then it'll help whatever blender you have out. You don't necessarily need, one of the fancier blenders, but I like to let it sit in water. I do it 1-to-1. So 1 cup of whatever dried fruit to 1 cup of water. And then you just dump it all into the blender, blend it up, and it makes a paste, which is really nice for, baking and doing things like that, or adding things like we do, like savory plum paste too for different recipes. Really fun. So yeah, that's the main way that we use it. You could like take dried fruit and put it into something else as well, but yeah, I love playing with the different varieties of different sweetness and different flavors that all the dried fruit has.
So if a muffin recipe or a pancake recipe is calling for maple syrup, let's say, you can just dilute those dates, spin them up, try to find the right kind of sweetness for you and play around with it each time, and use those dates to replace the maple syrup.
Exactly. And I noticed too, like at the beginning, I liked stuff a lot sweeter than I do now, because your taste buds kind of refine. And that's the same with the saltiness as well. I find the longer you do it, you really like appreciate, how sweet a pear can be. And you might not have done that before. And so, as I've learned to do this lifestyle, it's like, oh, I notice I can kind of cut back on how much, or, when you share with friends, maybe you bump it up a little bit more, people that don't eat this way. So yeah, it's totally customizable for, where you're at in your journey.
So let's go back to the miso, because miso is not something that I'm personally used to cooking with outside of specific recipes or more Asian type recipes. So how would you use miso in a soup or a stew or a chili where it's not those Japanese type flavors to begin with?
I actually love it in pretty much anything that recipe would call for salt. It's actually pretty mild, especially if you get white. It's the mildest of all of them. And I love, what I like to do is kind of take it in just a little bit of water and kind of break it up. And then it helps it not clump up. It helps it distribute evenly. But we're not really looking for it to have a super strong flavor as it would in a soup. It's really mild, and it just adds kind of that more umami-ness that maybe you would be having if you had salt, or those things that it doesn't taste bland when you go to try it. Like, it doesn't look like it's needing anything. So we put it in all sorts of things, from like meatloaf, lasagna, cheese sauces, different things like that you typically would have salt in a regular recipe.
Sorry if you see us smiling, it's because the dog was being a bum earlier. So I brought her upstairs, and now she's taking her biggest, heaviest bone and throwing it all over above us. So if everybody can hear that, that's what that is. And that's why we're smiling over here on YouTube. So it doesn't have to necessarily be as much so that you taste the flavor of the miso, but it just adds to it. So something like lasagna would benefit. So what part of the lasagna do you put it into?
Yeah, the cheese sauce generally, or even you could put a little bit in the marinara, that kind of balance that acidity. Now, I will say with that, I like to kind of go slower, with the date stuff. You can kind of go a little bit heavier if you like sweetness, but you don't want it to be too salty. So I always suggest, starting slow, like, we're only putting in maybe a tablespoon for the entire meatloaf or something like that. So, you can play around with the amount. It's not going to make or break, the recipe, bumping it up or taking it away. But I definitely recommend a soy-based one because all of the research has been done on soy. People ask me a lot of times that have soy allergies, can I use chickpea? Can I use whatnot? And the science isn't out yet. It probably is fine for, protection, but we can't really say until it's tested. So I always tell people, if you can't have soy, definitely get the white soy miso. And then, if not, I would leave it out and bump up all the other, spices and flavors, because I'm very cognizant of my heart health and, blood pressure. And so it's something I still monitor, take my blood pressure, every once in a while now, because, you want to know that you're doing the right things and everything's in check.
Definitely. Dulse is something that is salty by nature as well, and can work in different sauces and dressings and things like that too.
Yeah, that definitely has a little bit of a stronger flavor, I find. Yeah. So that's great. Like when we do like crab cakes and things like that, we definitely love that flavor because it brings it out, a little bit more. I've got really into just eating a little bit out of the bag each day for my iodine. And we get like a dried smoked applewood flavored, which I'm not a huge like seaweed fan. I would not like be eating nori sheets out of the package, but that's like a little piece of it every day. Like, it's not bad. It's enjoyable. And I can get my iodine in that way.
I could eat nori all day, every day. Before you ask your question, I want to go back to miso for a second.
Again.
Because miso is fermented, right? So miso is fermented, which means that it should have a long shelf life on your refrigerator shelf. Do you ever find that your miso, if it lasts long enough, do you ever find that your miso goes bad? Or how do you know if the miso's off and you've had it too long?
Yeah, it lasts pretty much forever. I buy a container and I stick it where the butter is in the butter area in my refrigerator is where it lives. And it lasts, it takes me about 6, maybe 8 months to go through a tub that they sell at our store. And that's even with making recipes and testing things and cooking all the time. I haven't run into an issue that it's been bad. Sometimes if you buy it like on Amazon or some things that don't send it refrigerated, I've had problems with it coming like cracked, the packaging. So I've now switched to just going into our grocery store, and a lot of Asian supermarkets have it. Usually it's in the refrigerated section. And I find that that's kind of the best way. Sometimes if it goes bad, you can notice the color kind of getting like deeper than when you started. So that's usually the kind of the test, and then the smell test is,
Yeah, sometimes it smells a little tangy, and I've only had it for 2 months, and I'm like, well, it's not worth it. So I take this like $9 thing of miso and throw it in the garbage because I don't want to take the chance. But I never know if I should trust it or if it's my brain not trusting it, or is actually my nose smelling something.
It does have a little bit of it smells. It doesn't not smell like anything. So I think you're okay. But even like most times they come with a little paper seal. I just like leave the paper seal. I don't ever take it off. I just add another, it's just like another layer with the lid. Right. And we keep it at the top of our refrigerator to keep nice and cold. But I haven't, since we've switched from not buying it on Amazon, I haven't had any issues.
I think I just need to smell it when I first get it so that I'm not comparing it to nothing. I'm comparing it to what it is. That's what I just realized. Sorry, what was your question?
What has become your favorite recipe to make?
That's hard. It's like picking your favorite child. There are recipes that I've recreated from like my childhood and special recipes that we've made whole food plant-based. So we have like a chocolate cream cheese cake that we make mainly on my husband's birthday and maybe Christmas. We make it like a couple of times a year, but not very often. And it's a recipe that I've taken. That was my great aunt's recipe that they made all the time growing up. They made it for every holiday, every birthday. And it was so far from whole food plant-based. And it took me forever to kind of figure it out, but I've figured out a way of making it, and it tastes, I think, even better. like there's the cake part and the cheesecake part. And back before this, the cake part would get really dried out. The cake would only be really good for like a day. The way we make it, everything is nice and moist and like goes well together, and it can last, if it lasts a week, it can last a really long time and still be good as the first day. And so that was pretty much my Mount Everest of recipes I've done. So I'm very proud of that. My husband asks for it every year for his birthday. And just other things that are special, like there's a Christmas soup that I had growing up on Christmas Eve every year. And we made a whole food plant-based version that's a mushroom soup, and we put sauerkraut in it. And it just brings back those like memories that we had growing up. So, things that are important, I always try to tell people you don't have to give up family tradition or memories. You just can adapt it to fit your lifestyle. And, I love it. It's very fun. We can take it to families, get-togethers, and still have like our version of it. And so you don't feel left out or anything as well.
Yeah, I think that's huge because so many people are afraid that, they're not going to be able to eat the foods that they used to like. And you're right, you could adapt so many things in different ways to kind of fill in those traditions that families have. So that's pretty great.
And what about restaurant favorites, like maybe a blooming onion? What do you have for that?
Yeah, we actually have a blooming onion on our channel. So we just, instead of deep frying it, we bake it, and we, cutting the onion for a blooming onion is like the hardest part. But once you get the hang of it, it's just an onion with like breading, and, you take plant milk instead of cow's milk, and you do your seasoning blend with your, whole wheat breadcrumbs, or even now they sell these breadcrumbs that are called vegified, which are made out of like carrots and potatoes. And they're like breadcrumbs, which are great. And, you bake that or air fry it and make a dipping sauce for it. That's, out of white beans or silken tofu or something like that. And it's just as good. So like we've done all of that, where it's very much like, Outback Steakhouse, I think is the place here in the United States that sells them, but very much, comforting and things that are fun. So yeah, definitely even have a blooming onion recipe on our channel.
Amazing. I mean, you're talking about the channel, the food sounds great. I'd love to check it out. Maybe our listeners would like to check it out. So where can they go? Tell us where they could find more information about you and what you're doing.
So everything is at the Jaroudi Family. I picked that name because I wanted to help my family help your family get healthy. So you can go to YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, our website. And if you go to Google and just type in the Jaroudi Family, I'll pop up, and I'm happy to connect. I want to help as many people as possible. I even give my cell phone number publicly. So people text, I know. It hasn't backfired in the last couple of years, but people do call and text and ask questions, and I'm able to answer them and help them. And I really, again, it's just the biggest blessing to be able to get my health back, figure it out around the age of like 25, 26, and then be able to live this lifestyle and, raise a family this way. So I just want to help as many people feel as good as I do, and really know that they can go, up 180 from where they're at, if they're not in the place they want to be, by doing this.
Amazing. Brittany, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast. Everything you mentioned, we will link to in our show notes at planttrainers.com. And it's an inspiring story that you're helping lots of people, I'm sure, just like we're all trying to do. So keep it up, and thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.